A year and a half after the COVID pandemic was suddenly announced over, millions suffer from mysterious illnesses after the virus or the vaccines.
But then all of a sudden they go from that to having basically not able to stand up for a long time, not able to run anymore.
And for an uncounted number of people, lives are not the same.
It sounds dramatic, but I remember thinking, how old does my youngest need to get before he doesn't need me as much?
This week, a doctor and a diagnosis helping thousands. Americans don't trust the federal government. Fewer than a quarter believe Washington is committed to doing what is right. And there's good reason. They were surveilling you and other staffers on Capitol Hill.
They were absolutely surveilling our communications, yes.
This week, a chilling whistleblower account of federal officials spying on the very congressional staffers that oversee them.
When China landed a spacecraft on the moon's far side this summer, America's existential threat became extraterrestrial.
Whoever dominates space, including the moon, is going to control the destiny of the planet.
Blasts off into the sky.
A look at China's challenge to meet us on the dark side of the moon.
Welcome to Full Measure. I'm Sharyl Attkisson. Today we continue our reporting on an important story that stands to impact many of us in some way. It has to do with the latest research to help people suffering after effects from COVID vaccines, or both. The work we've done on this topic has been viewed by millions on TV and online. Today we head back to Birmingham, Alabama to get an update from a doctor who's become an international resource for diagnosing, treating, and unraveling the mysterious illnesses.
Down right there.
Dr. Jordan Vaughn has been playing medical detective ever since he first began diagnosing and treating COVID illnesses and vaccine injuries that are still confounding many doctors.
The additional thing we found is the venous component of that and had to fix that as well.
One of his newest discoveries has to do with something he's found in a significant subset of patients. The spike protein in COVID and made by the vaccines causes blockages in a major vein.
But the current way to fix it is actually something called a stent.
The body's iliac vein carries blood from the left leg to the heart. When the blood flow gets blocked, it can lead to symptoms from brain fog to irregular heartbeat, fatigue, and rigid muscles. Based on what Dr. Vaughn has seen, iliac vein problems in reaction to COVID and the vaccines could be impacting tens of thousands of people.
People that have kind of iliac vein compressions, they're common within the general population, but they are not necessarily clinically significant. But then all of a sudden they go from that to having basically not able to stand up for a long time, not able to run anymore, and it's just significantly affecting their life. So actually opening up that iliac vein allows that blood to get back to the heart and at the same time drain, in a sense, drain your venous system. My kind of partner in crime, I guess, in Colorado, we've done about 200 now in this patient base, anywhere from the ages of 15 to about 72, 73 is the oldest. And the young people definitely do very, very well. The older people, it does take a little longer because their veins are older to begin with.
Hannah Bourgeois, mother of 5, had a stent implanted to open up her iliac vein shortly after we first met her over a year ago at Dr. Vaughn's office. She'd gotten so sick after COVID and COVID vaccines, she was nearly bedridden for 2 years. Here's what she told us last year.
I felt like my body was just shutting down on me, and there wasn't anything I could do about it.
Now she describes a pronounced difference.
At my lowest point, I mean, it sounds dramatic, but I remember thinking, how old does my youngest need to get before he doesn't need me as much? Because I really didn't know how long I could keep going. We went to Mayo Clinic and really couldn't get any answers. And then I met Dr. Vaughn in, I think it was August of 2022. And he put me on the triple anticoagulant therapy. And I felt like a new person after that.
Then immediately after she got the stent in her iliac vein, she could see a difference, with color returning first to her left foot as blood flow opened up. She says her whole body symptoms improved. Ellen Redinger describes a similar recovery.
I feel like I noticed some changes immediately.
When we first met Redinger last year, she'd also gotten very sick after getting vaccinated and getting COVID. A competitive runner, she'd had to stop exercising entirely. Her cardiologist referred her to Dr. Vaughn. Here's what she told us then.
I mean, I can pinpoint the day, the time where I was. When I was running, I was doing a workout, and all of a sudden, I cannot feel my legs. I cannot feel, my heart rate is going 200. I can't do it. I call my dad, I'm like, I'm done working out. I can't do it. And I went for like 3 or 4 months of just feeling awful.
Today, an update after more than a year of treatment under Dr. Vaughn and his team. So you're one of the patients who's had a stent put into your iliac vein?
Yes.
What kind of a difference did you notice and when?
My coloration, immediately I had more pink to my skin. And then my heart rate took a little bit to come down, but I feel like that's normal because my heart rate was pumping so much to get the same amount of blood through my body, and it wasn't getting the same amount of blood. And so it would just take a while for my body to just recognize that I had this same amount of blood.
Now she's back on track and even running again.
It's one thing to open up the vessel. It's another to understand that all the vessels are also probably having issues. They're just not as apparently obvious as the one that's compressed. And so we've got to make sure not only that we open it up and allow venous flow to happen, but we've got to heal the rest of the vasculature too. And there's lots of ways that we do that, whether it's with anticoagulants, other kind of supplements that help with the inside of the vessel to heal back to the normal state.
What is your thinking today as to what is being caused by people who had COVID, maybe even without symptoms, versus what may be caused by people who had COVID vaccines and a problem with that?
So things like lots more neurological issues, stuff that's very disconcerting to the patient, but also mystifying to the neurologist. On top of that, it seems like immunologically, the vaccine makes your immune system in many ways different than it would be if you just had COVID. A lot of that is being discovered after the fact, which is kind of quite disconcerting.
The federal government doesn't seem to be putting much effort into the vaccine injury part of the COVID equation, even after hundreds of millions of Americans got the shots and we're still learning about serious side effects. A major study called Recover is spending more than $1.6 billion tax dollars to find drugs that might help people with long COVID. But since most people who got COVID also had one or more vaccines, I asked a study spokesman, how are Recover researchers working to distinguish the impact of vaccines versus just COVID? The spokesman replied, confirming that Recover researchers are tracking vaccination status, but they are not currently studying long vax. I asked then, how do the researchers know if the illnesses they are seeing are due to long COVID or due to long vax or some combination thereof? The spokesman declined to respond and cut off our communications. Seems to me they're being presented with important data as we try to figure out, as we should be, what vaccine side effects there are, and yet they're calling them all long COVID. They're not distinguishing between the patients who may have been exacerbated because they were vaccinated.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunately on purpose. I will say in my clinic, the important thing is, have you been vaccinated? And then what were the symptoms after your vaccine? I would say some people never had any symptoms within that kind of 14-day issue, but then months later started to have interesting kind of cardiovascular problems or new onset brain fog, those kind of things. But I like to make that distinction because it does kind of inform us. I'd say the amount of damage seems to be more, the more times the spike has been allowed to run through your body.
No, it would be because...
A final note, although there's good news in terms of treatments and discoveries, patients are seeing dramatic improvement. Dr. Vaughn says their health isn't returning fully back to where it used to be. For Redinger, she says her immune system seems markedly different now. It sounds like you've had some health problems. You keep getting sick.
Yes.
Do you think this is a lingering effect of, or maybe impact of pre-existing conditions exacerbated by the illness from COVID and the vaccines?
Yes.
I'm a pretty active person, and I tried to just get back into everything that I had been doing. And I realized I'm not back to where I was pre-2020, pre-COVID. I've really had to modify how I do life now, and it's taken me a while to figure that out.
What is your advice to so many people who are looking for answers?
So first, I think it is to write down all your symptoms and write down things that you're experiencing. I think that really helps a lot of the doctors to put it all together, because especially when somebody comes with 6 months or a year of issues, and some of those issues change throughout time, it's really hard, especially in the way our medical system's set up, to sit there and digest that in 15 minutes. The other thing is coming up with a temporal relationship that either a vaccine or an infection had to your symptoms. And I think that's really helpful to doctors to go, you know what, you're right.
Dr. Vaughn has established the Microvascular Research Foundation to develop clinical trials and research. When we come back, wait until you hear who government intel officials spied on this time. Full Measure has learned that in the coming days, an Inspector General report is expected to be released related to a disturbing and important case. It implies government officials abusing their authority, crossing an important constitutional line that's supposed to ensure separation of powers. It involves the Department of Justice and FBI spying on the very people investigating the agency's misconduct.
Welcome, everybody.
When Senator Chuck Grassley and other members of Congress investigate insider claims about government wrongdoing, it's staffers like attorney Jason Foster who are doing much of the hard work behind the scenes. Some blowing the whistle to Congress are telling on the FBI and Department of Justice, or DOJ. Do you think that ruffled a lot of feathers inside the federal government when whistleblowers inside agencies would come to Senator Grassley with stories?
Oh, absolutely. Always.
Foster left his job as Grassley's chief investigative attorney 6 years ago and started his own watchdog group, Empower Oversight. Then last year, he got a shocking notification. He and other Capitol Hill staffers, Democrats and Republicans, had been secretly spied on in 2017 by the very government agencies they were investigating. They were surveilling you and other staffers on Capitol Hill.
They were absolutely surveilling our communications, yes.
So you got a letter from Google or an email?
I got an email from Google.
And what did it say?
It said, this is to notify you that, in 2017, we complied with compulsory process, and provided your information from your Google Voice telephone number and your Google email to the department. We complied with the subpoena.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
The time period of the spying was after Donald Trump first took office. Senator Grassley and Foster were among those officially investigating abuses by the Department of Justice and FBI related to their targeting of Trump in a false Russia collusion narrative. How big a violation and what kind of violation do you see this as?
It's a violation of the separation of powers because the Senate and the House should have had an opportunity before their staff's attorneys' information is collected to raise any objections to that. And certainly whistleblower communications are absolutely going to be chilled. They are going to be less likely to speak to Congress if they believe that the fact that they talk to Congress will be immediately unmasked and disclosed to the people back at the agency about whom they're trying to disclose wrongdoing.
The FBI and DOJ wouldn't answer our specific questions, but the DOJ told us that it has tightened up its processes. In 2021, following reports that the department had sought information related to members of Congress and congressional staff back in 2017, the department took several significant steps to review and enhance its relevant policies and procedures. The FBI and DOJ also justified their spying by saying it was to find the congressional staffer who leaked classified information to the media. The leaked classified material they were so worried about implicated them, the agencies, in wrongdoing. It proved the FBI lied on a court application to get a wiretap on Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page. Senator Grassley is now looking into the government spying on Foster and other staffers. In a statement, Grassley called the surveillance wholly unacceptable and said it offends fundamental separation of powers principles, as well as Congress's constitutional authority to conduct oversight. These revelations strongly suggest that the Justice Department weaponized its law enforcement authority to spy on the entities seeking to hold it accountable.
The attorneys for your elected representatives in Congress, who are supposed to hold DOJ and the FBI accountable for potential abuses, were targeted by those organizations. None of the safeguards that are supposedly there were triggered. And so, Congress didn't have an opportunity to object. And this is one branch of government collecting communications data on the other branch of government that's supposed to be doing oversight.
An interesting note, another person the DOJ allegedly spied on with a secret subpoena to Google is none other than Donald Trump's new nominee to head up the FBI, Kash Patel. At the time the DOJ targeted him, Patel was the lead lawyer on the House Intelligence Committee investigating FBI and DOJ misconduct in the operation to frame Trump for colluding with Russia. After a break, who owns the moon and its most valuable resources? There's a new space race underway for valuable prizes buried on the moon, and there's real concern the communist Chinese are ahead. Lisa Fletcher reports.
Touching down could be happening at any minute because...
Over the summer, in a remote corner of northern China, a small space capsule touched down.
It's landed. You can hear applause from the ground control and command
What
center.
made this event important is that it's the first time any nation has brought back soil samples from the moon's far side. All part of an ambitious series of Chinese lunar missions and evidence of a new space race that's focused on the moon, with the U.S., China, and India all in the race. The prize? Reaching the moon's south pole, where scientists expect to find vital minerals and water contained in permanently shadowed craters.
Why so much focus on the moon?
We know there's water on the moon. From water they can make fuel. It's also a lower gravitational force liftoff pad for other space travel.
Bill Posey is a Republican congressman from Florida. He represents what's known as the Space Coast, where the Kennedy Space Center is located.
We need to have a presence on the moon to establish that we have some rights to the moon.
It's that idea of establishing rights that's creating the rush to reach the lunar South Pole. Whoever gets there first, the argument goes, can dominate and keep others out. Many experts point to the example of disputed islands in the South China Sea, where China has placed troops and built military bases as a way of controlling the area and denying it to their rivals. If that happened at the lunar South Pole, it could give China an unbeatable advantage. It's a serious concern for NASA's chief, Bill Nelson. He's been sounding the alarm for several years over China's plans.
If there's water, there's rocket fuel, hydrogen and oxygen. The Chinese get there, it's always the possibility that they say, you stay out, this is our exclusive zone.
Professor Everett Dolman teaches space strategy at Johns Hopkins University and the U.S. Air Force Air War College. He's also a veteran of the National Security Agency.
The Chinese have done something that in retrospect seems quite obvious, but in prospect was not talked about very much. They have decided to put a research base on the south pole of the moon. This will be a scientific research base, not a military base, but it does allow them to establish a zone around that base that no one else can occupy because it would interfere with their scientific experiments.
The United States also has plans to build a base near the moon's south pole, but NASA's Artemis program has been beset by delays, while China's mission schedule seems to be on track for now.
for the Chinese, their entire space program, commercial, civil, and military, is all under the People's Liberation Army. There is no distinction. And the Chinese have also said, and the Russians have also said, that if you can control space, you can control the destiny of the future. You control basically all of humankind. And so the stakes could not be higher.
China's next 2 missions to the moon are already planned and scheduled, meaning the race to the moon's resources is well underway. For Full Measure, I'm Lisa Fletcher in Washington.
And stay with us. We're back after a short break. This past week, President-elect Donald Trump publicly demanded the release of hostages, including 7 Americans still believed held by Islamic extremist terrorists. Trump threatened that if they are not let go before he's sworn in, there will be hell to pay. Terrorists took 253 hostages and murdered 1,200 people in their October 7th, 2023 attack on Israel. 100 are thought to still be held in a small strip of land between Israel and Egypt called Gaza. Gaza is ruled by the militant group Hamas, committed to the destruction of Israel. There could be a remarkable parallel in history here.
And my fellow citizens,
in 1981, the day of Ronald Reagan's inauguration, Iranian Islamic extremist terrorists released 52 American hostages. They'd been held 444 days in what was known as the Iranian hostage crisis. If Hamas releases the Gaza hostages around the time Trump's sworn in, their time in captivity will be about the same length, 444 days, as the American hostages held in Iran. On another Trump initiative, during his campaign, he pledged to rehire military members expelled from the service for rejecting COVID vaccines. He promised they'd get an apology and back pay. Only a few dozen of the fired 8,000 service members are so far reported to have rejoined following repeal of the vaccine mandate. And an update on a reporting about people getting fired for refusing COVID vaccines. A former employee of Blue Cross Blue Shield Michigan recently won more than $12 million for her wrongful firing after she refused a COVID shot on religious grounds in 2022. Lisa Domsky was an internet technology specialist at the health insurer. She applied for a religious exemption to the company's vaccine mandate, saying it violated her Catholic beliefs because the vaccines were developed or tested using aborted fetal cells. Coming up next week on Full Measure, a look at a troubled federal agency after a monster hurricane exposed ongoing problems.
The Georgia Emergency Management Agency has been here since before the hurricane even hit, and I haven't personally seen any FEMA people, but I'm assuming FEMA's here and helping people.
Okay, but you're the battalion chief, and you haven't personally talked to any FEMA people.
I have not talked to any FEMA people.
FEMA's role and reforms next week on Full Measure. Thanks for watching. We'll see you then.